I got the urge suddenly to spitball a bit, like what Buddhism can and cannot do for you, a little bit. I actually have a very deep appreciation of Buddhism. I respect it totally, and I have a reasonably comprehensive understanding. I've done Buddhism a bit. So I want to articulate in good faith the best version of it, but then also therefore ground it a bit more properly in a wider view, which I don't think is done very often. Say how it's not necessarily good enough, which is a very legitimate thing. So what is Buddhism? Buddhism is it is the knowledge network and life activity process of becoming Buddha. That's what it is. That's 100% of what it is. It is no more or less than that. Buddha is a word which means enlightened one. It means one who has achieved enlightenment, one who has actually gone through the process that is clinically and rigorously understandable and reproducible of just doing enlightenment, which is a thing a human can do. And when you do enlightenment, you are a Buddha. You are an enlightened one. And Buddhism is just how do you do that? That's actually what it is. And it's very rare that people will sort of be that blunt about it. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of baggage. Why are you eating a rock? There's a lot of baggage attached to Buddhism. It's wound up in the kind of language and communicative habits of general religion, and it is regarded as a religion. It's one of the great world religions, and I really think, strictly speaking, Buddhism just is not a religion. It's just not. That's not what it is. It never was. It's essentially a psychology. It actually is just a psychology. It's actually a superior psychology to modern bourgeois psychology, very easily. It's intrinsically dialectical psychology. It's a psychology that's grounded in a necessary process of personal critique and dynamic development in order to rigorously train your capacity for discernment, and in order to therefore reach deeper and more profoundly into your own psyche. You can be a Buddhist Christian, or a Buddhist Muslim, or a Buddhist whatever the fuck. And if you are a Buddhist whatever the fuck, you are a better whatever the fuck than if you were not a Buddhist whatever the fuck, because Buddhist is just the good psychology. It's just I know how the human mind functions in a predictable manner, and I know how to relate to myself and my own experience in the world in a way such that I am being my best self. That's putting it in a little silly language, but I'm just radically simplifying, because I don't hear people talk about it this way very often. So Buddhism is there's the Four Noble Truths. And then there's all the... I don't want to go into all the... I have read this stuff and I've thought about them, but there's all these different sort of concepts and things associated with it. But the thing is, all of that is just downstream as the way in which it has been communicated onward through history from what it actually was, which was just the moment of rationally sought and successfully found enlightenment as a human experience which is reproducible. That's what Buddhism is about. It's about just, I need to figure out enlightenment. Okay, I figured out enlightenment. By the way, guys, you can just do enlightenment. It's not mystical. You do it. Please, go do it. That's what it's about. And all the traditional sort of concepts and the ways of conveying various parts of it are just about that, and that there's just a long tradition of how people have effectively done this. But that's what you actually have to grasp, is like, that's what's going on. Okay, so what's enlightenment? And to talk about that, obviously I will lapse into just what will sound more classically like Buddhist lingo, etc. Okay, so this should be fun. Speedrunning, explaining enlightenment that people have sort of struggled to articulate for millennia. But anyway, so enlightenment is sort of a slight dual-sensed term or concept, meaning both like a general state of mind which has been discovered and is remained within, like you are an enlightened one. But then also it refers obviously to the more of the kind of like particular moment of doing it that is sought, and that is like the actual escape from what is it, like samsara. I used to know these words, whatever. So enlightenment basically means the discovery of the true sense of self. Obviously, I'll talk a bit about the word self. But here I just mean like a very loose sense. I just mean like one's immanent experience of reality, which is experienced as particular, and like through this direct individual perspective. It's just the experience of becoming toward, and then like you reach it and you reveal the reality of the fact that your actual living experience is a matter of a very grounded and easily discerning and very automatically peaceful relation to living reality. And it is the sort of the unmasking of a great deal of virtual projected concepts which had been clouding that more direct experience of reality and had been wrongly wound up within the prior conception of self, and that is the false self, the self that does not exist. So enlightenment, basically, to lapse into my language a little bit, because, you know, I'll talk better. Enlightenment really is the process of discovering the dialectical cosmos, which reveals go to sleep, please. Which reveals the falsity of the liberal self, the Cartesian self, the isolatable self, I think, is the crucial sort of thing. So this is more true in the West than like ever, and like today, and like consumerist modern culture out of fuck. But like, you know, Buddhism came about in ancient India. This is like a general sort of phenomenon that whoa, where are you going? Careful. Crazy. Oh, come here. Oh. Crazy. Okay, there you go. My son trying to kill himself. Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a bit about the self thing, that there is no self and the non-self and all that shit. So a big part of the process of Buddhism, the path toward enlightenment, is the realization that there is no self, which is a very commonly articulated thing. And then there's a commonsensical retort to this, that like, of course there's a self, I'm me, he doesn't have my hair. like my actual physical strands of hair. He does not have them, I do. Now, this is like actually reasonable. Because it's important to understand that when it's said that there is no self, it's not that like material reality is like not like ultimately itself real, and that your sort of immanent experiential like part of it, like the fact that you experience yourself as being this, that's not real. The point is all about integration with the totality. What does not exist is the sort of conceptually imposed and like automatic and wrong-headed separation of the self as in its most foundational being separate from like just fucking everything else. So the self that there is no is, it's not that like I exist, it's that I am not that tree. I am me, and that tree is that tree, and we are in our being ultimately at the most real level. We are distinct entities. So it's not, that's just like bullshit. What actually is the case is understanding that there is a singular, totalistic, absolute being, and you are it, and it is you. And look around, you see yourself. And the self as separating the more viscerally immanent aspects of your particular person, as distinct from like looking at those leaves over there. That's wrong. So really it's just like knowing that like there's a dialectical cosmos. That's what it is. Because it's just like, you know, you are the leaves are you. That's actually what is meant by these kinds of like very hippie sounding turns of phrase or whatever. It's just that you actually don't know your own being, and you're not appropriately relating to your most fundamental sense of self if you discern your sense of self and your most fundamental being as ultimately separate from everything else. And there's this. So then people talk about this sort of notion of the non-self, being without being a self, or being without a self, or whatever. And what that actually just refers to is like a kind of state of mind and living experience of just living like viscerally dialectically and viscerally within unity with everything, and just not automatically imposing this virtual separation between entities according to this notion of like particular objects. Instead, just understanding that there is a singular totalistic process of being, and you are within that, and that is within you, and that is what there is. Again, this is just dialectics. It's just like everything's in motion, everything's one thing. But Buddhism in particular, Enlightenment in particular, is like the path of sort of realizing the individual sense of dialectics in order to free your state of mind properly. So then maybe let's go back to enlightenment, and in particular then now the kind of the moment of enlightenment. So again, the enlightenment as like moment, enlightenment as like an actual like act that is done. This is really essential to understand. This is kind of the important thing, like more than the self shit, to understand Buddhism, is that you can do enlightenment. Enlightenment is a thing you can do. And when you have become enlightened, you just are enlightened. It's not like a quirky weekend. It's, you know, if someone like does a hard drug and like goes like, whoa, and for like 2 days they're very loving or something, and it's gone. That was enlightenment. Enlightenment is something you can do to utterly reform your most foundational conception of how you live and relate to your living. And when you have done it, because it is true, that's it. You are enlightened. It's something you discover, and it's real. And therefore, you discover it, and you don't fucking look back. You just remain in this peaceful sort of state of mind, kind of. So, enlightenment, the moment, is sort of it's like the functional limit of the wisdom conveyed by the tradition of language. It's the functional limit of all these things people talk about. If there is no self, you shouldn't separate yourself, and you need to know that life is suffering, but there's an escape from suffering. All this stuff that's like associated with Buddhism are like the methods by which people are pointing each other in the direction of the apotheosis of that process. And that peak of that conceptual hill is just a place in experience you can reach. And that's it. It's over. You did it. And again, I'm putting this in a little bit of a silly way, but I'm like overcorrecting, you know? No one tells you this way, because everyone sort of who talks about Buddhism is generally like very much on the path, and like I'm working on myself to more effectively discern this part of the Eightfold Path or whatever. And like, that's great. That's legitimately, that's great. That is great. I'm not a downer on that. I'm just saying it's good to offer a more sort of commonsensical, universalizable sort of sense of what's actually going on here for like the non-believers, which is just like, the way you sort of feel a bit shit a lot, that's not grounded in like material and necessary components of your life. Like you just sort of like are thinking about stuff and therefore are like, gosh darn. You can like not do that, but like it's really fucking hard to not do that. It's going to take a lot of work to reliably not do that, but you absolutely can not do that, and then you'll just feel better fucking forever. That's actually what's going on here. That is what's going on here. So let me circle back. Let me circle back to the moment by going through the Noble Truths, which I didn't bother with at all. So the Noble Truths of Buddhism are the Four Noble Truths are like foundational concepts. But again, these are just like the historically effective components of communication of the experience, and the experience of the thing. But anyway, the Four Noble Truths are that life is suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There's an escape from this suffering. And like, this is how to do it. Like the fourth one is the Eightfold Path. The fourth one is just like, do all this shit. Which is obviously like a bit of a conceptual explosion, but fair enough. It's a very clinical procedure. Like it's a construction of like a whole life process in advance to allow people to walk a path toward the moment. So life is suffering. The life is suffering thing is kind of hilarious because he's kind of fucking with you. Let's be honest. He's kind of fucking with you because obviously life isn't suffering for the Buddha. That's the whole point. so the Buddha isn't just suffering. That's what you, and that's oversimplifying. But you basically know life isn't suffering. But like to realize that life is not suffering, you must step one, accept life is suffering, which is hilarious. So what life is suffering is that suffering is not merely this rationally sort of produced experience based in like some sort of like objectively negative component of life. It's not like he chopped my arm off, I am suffering. It's that more often than that, the suffering you're having is like he looked at me funny and I can't stop thinking about it and I'm suffering. And the point is that because there exists that kind of suffering, because there exists that kind of just self-created, just spirally regurgitating, infinite, inward suffering, life is like just totally suffering, because you're in this inescapable loop of suffering. It's not necessarily you're just like in pain all the time, like everyone's being tortured endlessly. It's the point is that you are sort of locked in habitual loop where you are very consistently subjecting yourself to these kinds of virtually imposed suffering. And more than that, you are acting generally in the long term in such a way that is simply reproducing the conditions from which it will again happen. So life in this like totalistic manner is suffering in a very inescapable way, because what's being communicated is that the kind of suffering it is this automatic conclusion of the nature of the function of our minds. The mind just does these things that cause it to suffer. So that's the life is suffering thing. So then obviously I've already started on the cause. So there is a cause of suffering. The cause of suffering is, what's the classic way to put it? It's like grasping, I think is usually the word now. But so it's like trying to hold on to something, trying to like get something in particular to remain what it is, and like that is it, and I can rely on that. That is the cause of suffering. Again, this is the most profoundly dialectical point ever, because what it is it's like hypostatizing something. I think that is that word. You are projecting a stasis of being onto a component of reality. You are taking it in a particular form in which it is expressed to your experience, and you're taking that to be like eternally ultimate. That is just it. That is how it is. It is that way. So the cause of suffering is the psychological reliance for like the necessary like joys of life, the satisfactions and happiness and peace, like the necessary motivational components of the mind depend structurally upon this expectation. That's why life is suffering, because you then find out inevitably that the thing at the time you were latching onto is not that, actually. And then that throws you for a loop, literally through the fucking samsara loop. Because you had formed a sense of self, and this is the self that does not exist. You had formed a sense of self, like a separatable, particular object alongside other distinct objects, which was defined distinct from all the other objects according to its dependence upon this thing being reliably this way. And then you inevitably find out this thing is not this way, because fucking everything changes all the time, forever. And so you find out the thing is not the way, and you're like, fuck, I was really counting on that being that way. And that's the cause of the suffering. And this is very insightful. This is like, I mean, Buddhism is legit. Again, I said I fully respect it. This is like the most fucking profoundly insightful, because crucially, you're not like consciously necessarily dependent on this. This is not necessarily consciously or clearly or directly the cause. This is like an ultimate general diagnosis of like the general pattern of the suffering of the human mind, is that there is this structure to it. It may be very hard to discern within a particular context how this is the case, but ultimately, trust me, this is the fucking case. Or, go trust a Buddha or whatever the fuck. So this is the cause of suffering. It's the habitual act as a particular person of grasping toward a particular, like, projected, conceptualized notion, a certain thing in reality as being static in some way and relying upon it. And then finding out you're full of shit. So then there's an escape from suffering is the third thing. So life is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's escape from suffering. The escape from suffering, actually, in the classical sort of communication, that's not really expanded on particularly, which I found kind of funny. That it's like looped up with either the second or the fourth explanation, but it's like just its own thing because it's like a very formalistic. Again, it's clinical. It just like sounds right. It's easy to memorize and therefore act upon. Anyway, so the third one is there's an escape, and the fourth one is this is the escape. And the fourth one, the escape, is the Eightfold Path, which is the bunch of noble things. Which so basically is like be noble and you'll get there. that's kind of it. And obviously you could talk for hours about all of that and the implications and the methods and etc. But I'm speedrunning. So in total, the four noble truths is just like life is suffering. You're always fucking suffering. Gosh darn. There is a particular reason why this is the case. And it cannot be the case, and this is how to do it. So when you put it all together like that, it's actually very, very clear. It's a very... Alright, a day passed after I got a call. So I ended up explaining the whole Eightfold Path, which I just sort of changed my mind about. I thought was necessary to go through. But I meant to just explain enlightenment. So I want to do that now, and then get on to my actual, like, hot take element. So I want to talk more directly about enlightenment itself, rather than like these methods by which people are pointed at it. And so I'll do that, but it'll be a lot less. But so there's a kind of issue in Buddhism, which is that talking about enlightenment itself, like directly, which is like the point of the whole thing, there's a kind of a kind of inevitable loss of the sort of aesthetic rationality that's in place, like the clinical nature, which I mentioned a bit, of all the actual concepts that are traditionally utilized most, where this sort of like talking about what you can do to become enlightened is all very rational. It is like a kind of a scientific endeavor, in a sense. It's very it's a reproducible sort of method. But in the actual moment of enlightenment, and then the actual state of mind of enlightenment, like communicating the state of mind of enlightenment if you're not enlightened, is there's a kind of there's a loss of this rational sense, because it's not something you can communicate straightforwardly, rationally, logically. You just can't, because the issue of it takes one to know one. Because if you are enlightened, you talk about enlightenment, you have the object of enlightenment to refer to. Like the object is just in a logical, formalistic sense, the object in this sense just being like the state of mind of enlightenment, like not, obviously not like a separate thing. You have the object of enlightenment to refer to, and if someone else also has the object of enlightenment to refer to, then they have their own sense of that, and you can form communication in this way. That's the easiest way to communicate. And usually you can communicate something to someone even if they don't have the object themselves, based on like sort of conceptually apprehending different components and having different aspects of experience of a thing, and therefore they can put together it imaginarily, and you can communicate relying on that. But enlightenment, you can't really do that. Because what enlightenment is the utter destruction of the pre-enlightenment notion of relation to anything itself. It is the discovery of a new sort of form of relation to everything. So if you're not enlightened, you just can't really conceive of this. It's just utterly beyond you. And then, but if you are enlightened, it's the most obvious thing in the world possible ever, because it's just like, this is how anything. So in a word, the most effective way this is communicated today is this notion of ego death, where ego death is this thing that, I mean, this is what happens when you do the hard drug on a fun weekend. It's like a temporary sort of jump into and like insight into the actual state of mind of enlightenment, where ego death is the actual sort of experience of your wrong-headed sense of self as like separate from everything else, like melting into the total unity and feeling integrated in the full like process of reality. Ego death is that, and like people sort of are able to sort of imagine that a little bit, but you know, if you just see it as like a thing drugs do to you, then it doesn't feel very real. What enlightenment is that you achieve that, what ego death does, that kind of melting away of the separateness into the total unity, as like a general sober, constant state of mind. Like I've referred to it as a moment, but the moment isn't that you just do an ego death and you go back to normal. The point is that like the moment is the falling away of the illusion utterly. The moment is just to say you do go from not being enlightened to being enlightened, and that's a thing. There's a bit of a swing when that hits you. I mean, that's actually what nirvana is. Speaking in this very like materialist, like it's a psychology kind of way, I'm saying nirvana refers to this sort of experience of just this overwhelming peace of mind grounded in this realization that what you really are is this kind of self-love of the universe, and by finally and utterly destroying the illusion of separateness, you reveal this the most immanent part of you sense of how what it is to be in love, kind of like it is to be like what it is to be, as in what it is to be a being, what it is to subjectively be, what it is to experience, is necessarily to be within this integrated totality, wherein there is mutual interrelation on the grounds of mutual recognition and this unifying, loving relation. I'm definitely lapsing into takes one to know one. So I feel like I'll sound a bit crazy to some people, but like also I feel like I should point out, I didn't even say. So I never explained because I kind of wanted to like go through the motions a bit before revealing my hand. But so I like kind of did Buddhism. Like in my own kind of silly way, I'm a Buddha, which is to say I did enlightenment. I did that. And now definitely to some people that will sound hilariously, it'll sound egotistical, it'll sound like self-righteous. But like I said, I mean, kind of the most important thing about Buddhism, like the reason it like matters and is significant and has sustained throughout history, is that like you can do it. You can. You really can do it. So to reveal my hand a bit, I went through a process at a certain point in my life a few years ago, over the course of a few months, of just doing a lot of psychological work and stripping away of layers of false identity, and it culminated in this experience, which I did quite sort of work toward and have in mind as getting to, and then it happened. Where I just like actually abolished in a final stroke the sort of infrastructure of my full self. And I experienced how I described nirvana. There was a kind of a falling into non-action from the old rigidity of like anxious need for like conscious cause and conscious action. I did this. So I'm not going to go into that too much specifically necessarily, because it's not really just what I'm talking about today. But I just want to point that out now, and I want to say that I, in particular, had quite a kind of Christian enlightenment. And what that just means is that, like, so again, Buddhism is just a psychology. It's a methodological exposition of the possibility of revealing the true nature of living being for people. And when I say I had a Christian one, what I mean is that, like, I did my own process according to ultimately a kind of Christian conceptual tool set. Like, my personal methods of destroying my false self, and my personal methods of pragmatically interpreting elements of my progression were through a kind of Christian conceptual framework. And then the moment of enlightenment and subsequent falling into nirvana and acting in this kind of wu way, this acting without acting way. It all just, I was able to sort of articulate it to myself, when I wanted to, like, not that you need to. I mean, if you do it, you don't need to, but just when I want to do, or when I'd try to explain it to people who I wanted to explain it to, or I felt like were honestly sort of listening to that. How I'm able to articulate it was in a certain kind of Christian way. Like, it felt like I was sort of embodying judgment. That's a whole thing. I don't know. I might talk about that, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm just pointing that out now. That so having done all the sort of the conceptual groundwork of, like, this is what Buddhism is about. Now I'm just pointing out. Like, legit, like, it works. Like, you do that. And I'm just pointing out, in the particularized form of your experience in life, it may take the form of a certain kind of Buddhism. I very much had a kind of Christian kind of Buddhism. And I have a kind of a multi-sided sense of what happened there. A part of me is definitely sort of just with the with a sort of distance from myself, like a sort of objectivity to it, I do sort of think essentially what happened is, I come from a Christian culture. I'm Irish. I, in particular, was not Christian. I was actually, I was literally like the atheist in my school. In a sense, I am still an atheist Christian. That's a whole episode. But I was an atheist, but I was from a culture of the dominance of the Christian ethic. So then, in my work to reveal the truth of being, I just the tools at play in my subconscious were Christian tools. That's one way in which I think that's kind of what I think happened there. And the other way is in which I kind of do. I think I actually am a Christian. I do kind of think actually what I did followed this kind of Christian framework in a way that I actually do think I could. If I got into the weeds with someone else who did enlightenment, I could probably sort of talk to them in a way that yes, this is how you were doing this Christian thing. I do think that's legit. But, they might be able to tell me this is how you were doing this Muslim thing. I'm open to that. But anyway, because, like I said at the start, Buddhism is not a religion. Buddhism is not just a school of thought among others or something. Buddhism is a method for the intended revelation of the immanent experience of a particular perspective. It's just a way of taking you and making you more you. Okay, so now I want to actually get into basically the actual subject matter, which is all of that Buddhism stuff was just sort of, I just wanted to sort of convey that I take Buddhism very seriously. I understand it as a very genuine thing, a very real thing. I'm not in any way slightly putting down Buddhism. Kind of it literally saved my life, to be honest. Before those few months, before that sort of period in my life, I was a very just egregious example of the false self, the separated self. I was in a years long cycle of repeating depression periods that were just getting worse and worse, and the root of it all was very much this illusion of separateness. It was very much a reliance I had in my own particular self upon grasping at particular kind of values that I sort of quite generally subconsciously was relying upon as these sort of static essences of social motivations, and I was just doing all my decision making and my day-to-day living and my automatic habit forming on the basis of orbiting certain things that I expected to be the case. I don't know. I don't need to wholly psychoanalyze myself, but I just want to say that Buddhism is serious, but I'm quite serious about Buddhism. But now, so anyway, just taking Buddhism as a given, I wouldn't even have bothered all of that if Buddhism was just more common. I envision a world in which the components of the mind are just effectively exposited in primary education, and enlightenment is just an inevitable matter within early maturity. And everyone's just enlightened. I think we can totally do that. And in that world, I would not have bothered with that very long segment of this episode, because it's just a given. So, anyway, I want to talk about the limits of Buddhism. So, in general, what I'm referring to is just different elements of the way in which, like I said, Buddhism is not a religion. Um, and like that's a good way of summarizing it, because like let me sort of state like what is a religion, like what makes a religion itself, and like what does a religion do for you that Buddhism doesn't. um, a religion is like a total aesthetic of living. It's a general sort of like foundation of perception and self-relation and interpretation and ethics, upon which the whole of life can be set. That's what makes a religion a religion. Like if something is acting that way, it is acting as a religion. So obviously, like Christianity is this way. Like it's like all encompassing. You are a Christian. Like if you are a Christian, then you are a Christian in how you like do ethics, or literally in how you like teach objective matters, or in how you just like take a walk. And the same is true if you are Muslim, if you are Hindu, if you are whatever. This is not the case with Buddhism exactly the same way. And it's understandable that people sort of think it is. Because of how I mentioned, because Buddhism being about enlightenment, it does have this element of just like overturning your whole self-conception, and then like therefore like through the lens of you, how you relate to everything. But it doesn't fundamentally have anything to say about like the world at large in some sense. Like all it has to say about the world at large is that how it is that you in particular are related to that is that you are in fact one process, and that how you must relate to yourself is via the apprehension that you and the world at large are this singular process. And for you in particular, for you in relation to yourself, which is like a major component of religion, that's great. Buddhism is very much checking the box. It's like very much motivating the total sort of foundation of how you act and how you think. But for the world at large, which, is another thing that's worth going into, it just doesn't really have anything to say, because the whole point is to just convey more and more effectively how it is that you are that, and that is you. And that's fine. I'm not saying that, no, actually, the tree isn't you, the tree is the tree. I'm just saying that the fact that the tree is you and you are the tree does not effectively convey to you the matter of like dendrochronology or something. It's not like a downer on Buddhism. It's just that like Buddhism is not going to carry into other subject matters. Like all it can do is just make you good at relating to yourself while you relate to those other subject matters. That's not necessarily true with like Christianity, like a religion. Because with a religion, it's not just a matter of you are a certain way. Like so for Christianity, like you are the embodiment of like God's creation. You are acting according to like divine plan, and you are imbued with the Holy Spirit if you're a good Christian, and this stuff. Like there's like those are things that are like self-relation. But then also when you go and like do dendrochronology, like there are things about the tree in particular as tree, as like methodologically distinct from you. And Buddhism just doesn't have this, because the entire methodology of Buddhism is just like pointing out how it is that in fact you are integrated. And that's true. That's literally just straightforwardly completely true. But I'm just saying it's just not a religion. It's just lacking this other component. And so what this means is that in general, Buddhism, it doesn't help you in assessing basically worldly matters, integrated worldly matters, in a way that like a religion actually should. And this is not to say that like a religion, like any religion that is acting as a religion, is necessarily like enough, like it's like completely successful at this. It's just that like if a religion is a religion, it will, through this kind of this total metaphysics, this like total embodiment of the cosmos into a singular sort of framework, it will help you sort of work in a certain way, like with a certain ethic, with a certain aesthetic, toward like different worldly matters, different parts of life. And Buddhism kind of doesn't. Like, so the point of this is if you treat Buddhism as a religion, which is quite common, lots of self-proclaimed Buddhists sort of act this way. If you treat Buddhism as a religion, this actually sort of leads to like a kind of stoicism, a kind of asceticism, or what do you call it? This leads to a kind of retreat from the world. And there's a sort of dishonor to that. And like, it shouldn't. Like, really, if you're doing all the noble things, like, in a sense, you could argue that that shouldn't be the case. But if we just take Buddhism as like a generalizable phenomenon, it just is, and it kind of inevitably is. It makes sense that it is, because if you're taking it as a religion, if you're taking it as like a total manner of relation to reality, and not just your particular sort of self-relation and exposition of your psyche and the matter of you within reality. Okay, so to skip a step, basically what I'm getting at is it's like not actually surprising at all if you read about how Buddhism was used in Imperial Japan to like motivate war crimes. This is because it's like you know, like you merely are the gun, you merely are the bayonet is you, and you're the victim is the bayonet, and the bayonet is the victim and is you, and you're not really killing them. The bayonet is just moving towards their body from your bayonet. And to be clear, this is all retarded. This is clearly absurd. And if you like are a Buddha, you wouldn't buy this shit. But the point is, treating Buddhism as a general phenomenon, as like a matter of collective organization, in the way that a religion is, like it functioning as a religion. This is a very unsurprising like emergence of that collective organization, because it's kind of a product of Buddhism pretending to be a religion. Because if Buddhism was a religion, the thing is, a religion has this component of like hierarchical integration among characters, which I think is lacking in Buddhism. Because in Christianity, you can be like, like you can be like a particularly effective disciple of Christ, who has rigorously, personally engaged in revelation, and you're very effective at conveying the Spirit to people. Or you can be like an absolute fucking peasant who can't even read and is just sort of trying to pick some berries, but is like basically acting in a bit of a loving way. And Christianity can like pragmatically unify these two characters very easily, because it's fundamentally a matter of there's this foundational aesthetic. There's like this foundational, just like matter that does not need to be said in terms of how they are one totality. Like, essentially, in that they are a totality of distinctions is the point. Whereas with Buddhism, what's going on is like what you can be is like enlightened or going toward being enlightened in some way, and all the unity, like the unity of distinctions that can exist, like the worldly, organizational, logistical unity that can exist there, is just a matter of like the enlightened one can like try to convey enlightenment to the unenlightened one, and the unenlightened one can just like be sort of inspired and confused and go try and get there. But there is this is so funny because the whole point is that the separateness is an illusion, but I'm going to say there's a kind of separateness. There's a separateness implicit to Buddhism in particular, as distinct from what are actually religions, in this way as a form of social organization, because it's not actually a general cosmic apprehension in the way that like religion or something is. Like, because it's interesting. It's interesting because basically Buddhism, unlike a religion, is like merely a direct and genuine knowledge of the totality of reality. That's all it is. That'll sound a little silly if you don't have that, but Buddhism is like just that. That's all it is. Unlike religions. Religions are like, they convey that, and then like as part of that and on top of it, they are also a bit more of like a particularized ideological formation. They are also like an explicit sort of ethic and aesthetic of how to actually do social organization and historical progression. And Buddhism just doesn't have anything to say about those things. Like and fair enough, like those are kind of, those are just like meta psychological. Those are just like beyond the point of the methodology of Buddhism. But for a religion, those are essential. A religion does this. And so this means that like Buddhism basically is just not enough. It's not enough to really live. What Buddhism does is it sort of primes you to live well. But then to actually live well, you need religion. And so then you might think like, well, hold on, why the fuck did I need Buddhism? Why shouldn't I just jump to Christianity? Or to, whatever you think is the right religion or something like that. Well, no, you should do Buddhism because Buddhism is going to make you better at that. Because like I said, Buddhism is about taking you and making you more you, because it's just about revealing the actuality of the truth of living. So if you think like Christianity is like a good or right religion, and that like you have to be a good Christian is how to live well, then like you're going to be a much better Christian if you're a Buddhist Christian, 100%, because you're going to actually just like know what you are and what the cosmos is. And then on the basis of that, you can do the things that Buddhism doesn't do. And you'll do them much more effectively than if you were just like caught up in the illusion of the permanent separated self based on these static things or whatever. Like if you're caught up in all that nonsense that Buddhism shatters for you, you'll just be a shitty Christian. So now I want to get a bit more material. So I mean, ultimately, I mean, obviously, this has come up. I'm a Leninist. I believe in and follow the total worldview of dialectical materialism. I regard that as just the worldview ultimately. And so, speaking from there, I think I can say that, like, religions generally, and sort of more so the more popular they are, or long-lasting, maybe more so they are, like, necessarily as a matter of, like, sustaining through social formations throughout historical change, religions generally do apprehend the dialectics of history rather well. They just do so unscientifically. And what that means is a religion will help you legitimately understand, like, the logos of history, like what's going on. It will, if you do the religion well, if you actually understand the religion well, it will help you understand worldly being and historical reality well, based on, like, just having this kind of allegorically imbued sense of the dynamics of reality. But it's unscientific, so you're just not gonna, like. It's not like real knowledge in the sense that it's not, like, methodologically, rationally, just set. It's not, like, formed into this kind of definite comprehension. It's like a religion is, like, capable of sort of intuiting its way through history pretty well, but it's not really capable of, like, reliably engineering it, which is what you need, like, Leninism for, basically. But then Buddhism kind of, like, doesn't even do this. Buddhism is, like, down a level from there. What Buddhism does is just, like, allow you to effectively take a walk and hear the birds, basically, which is wonderful. Please do that. But it does not really allow you to have a good sense of, like, why is the government corrupt? Like, you can say that, like, well, they're lost in the illusion of separateness, and they're therefore more effectively manipulated and motivated by these silly things that lead to evil or something. But, like, that just really isn't good enough of an explanation. And like, a religion kind of does actually explain that pretty well. Again, just unscientifically, but it actually does ground you pretty well within historical progression. It does sort of give more of a logistical framework for the more social, like the meta individual level of what's going wrong. But doesn't really do this because it just doesn't have anything to do with the meta individual level of what's going on, and, like, it shouldn't. It should, because it's not a religion; it's a psychology. It just is, like, a method for the discovery of the truth of your experience, and that, in its truest, most genuine possible sense ever, is just not going to tell you why the government is corrupt. It can't. It doesn't make any fucking sense, because to understand why the government is corrupt, you have to understand basically material factors, which is to say, sort of subconscious, like infra-individual and meta-individual factors that are at play as, like, an emergent product of the general social formations out of individuals, which are just therefore beyond and beneath analyzing the individuals in particular. So if you're merely analyzing the individuals in particular, you simply cannot even hope to apprehend these kinds of material matters. And interestingly, even though they are unscientific, a religion does convey these things. It does. I mean, this is what it's about when you sort of, in an integrated manner, talk about like demonic forces, or like this, the effects of like sinful structures and the need for like profits in social media. Or I don't know. Very very much unscientific, but you can talk about like meta individual worldly matters through the framework of religious language and religious living, and you can effectively distill some truth, and you can discern some direction. And with Buddhism, you just kind of cannot actually do that at all, because it's just what Buddhism is just not about any of that. It's not anything to do with it. And in theory, this is fine. But in theory, there's nothing wrong with this. Buddhism doesn't need to do this stuff. Buddhism just needs to fucking enlighten you. But Buddhism is one of the world religions, even though it's not a religion, which is strange. So, as a matter of general historical social organization, there's just kind of this thing going on that people are sort of trying to understand these things through Buddhism, and it's not good enough. I think this this issue I'm talking about is actually an interesting sort of case. I feel like it basically was kind of inevitable that this happened to Buddhism, that it just it became like procedurally like misapplied and used wrongly, because it just is so ancient. Like, I think like 2,000 years ago in India, if any like entirely new and entirely like psychologically revolutionary form of thinking and acting can come along, that's just gonna be understood as a religion. Obviously, because prior to the modern era, well, that's not too really prior to something like modern state structures, but then you could include in that like a pretty ancient like kind of like Confucian Chinese state or something. But anyway, prior to a certain degree of like social organization, anything that like successfully like forms out of chaos, social organization, just feels like a religion. Like to this very day, I am not at all overly critical of someone talking about Buddhism as a religion, and especially in ancient India as a religion. But I do think, strictly speaking, it's not right. I think, strictly speaking, basically just the notion of religion is just more of a collective emergent thing. And so it just more so implies like priorities or values with regard to like a broader like degree of like socialization and organization than like just how an individual understands and relates to things. I mean, in fact, really, it kind of feels like a product of the like our era's Cartesian prison, like the Western colonial philosophy being the default. It feels like a product of that Buddhism is just like put alongside as the same thing as like like Christianity or something, because like Buddhism just merely offers the totality of individual relation, and their Cartesian mind just regards that as the totality. But actually, it's not. And Christianity does speak to more than that. It does speak in a very deep way to the individual. It speaks to the self-relation and the methods of distilling and discerning within your own perception and reorienting yourself. But it also speaks to like how a collective of people should be, and like how to understand sort of historical things and natural things and all sorts of other things. And it agrees with Buddhism that like ultimately there's a unity to this totality of like seemingly distinct entities are a singular process. Buddhism just says that like this just is one thing, this just is being, and you are this at your innermost being. Christianity like goes a little further and is like, yes, this is just all this one being, this is God's creation, and there's a bit more implications in that. These are just not the same kind of thing, and regarding them as the same kind of thing, I do think is, like I said, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the limited philosophy of our time. And so then there's one more thing that's worth noting that's a bit out of the purview of the matter of it being not a religion. And so that's more precisely how Buddhism doesn't measure up to Leninism. How it doesn't measure up to the effect of historical materialism upon psychology. And what this is just that it's not that this isn't something that like contradicts Buddhism, but it's just like something that Buddhism on its own is not going to tell you, which is very important. Which is just that the nature of necessities in living themselves changes through history, through the development of the mode of production, of the productive forces. Because the nature of how things are necessary for basic living itself changes according to being conditioned in different ways by different productive processes over time, and then therefore different things are necessary and different things are expected, and etc., etc. And you know, in a sort of superficial way, you might say this isn't relevant because the point of Buddhism is just shouldn't be grasping at things that are not actually like, you know, immanent to you, material to you, anything that's just beyond yourself and your control. You shouldn't set your mind on being a certain way, and this simply is the case, and it's a very general rule. But there's just a bit of a tricky intrinsic element to applying that in reality, which is that, you know, Buddhism doesn't tell you like you don't need to eat food. Like, you need to eat food. It's just that it's just about separating physical needs from like basically psychic desires that are experienced as physiological needs due to the false self. That's what's going on. But the thing is, because you are in some particular kind of society, that means that there is some particular sort of set of things, I mean, like goods and services, that are actually like necessary to the reproduction of you on the most basic level, and other ones that are not, or other ones that like are not but seem to be to the false self. And the thing is, what all of these are is not a universal at all. What all of these are is wholly dependent on the mode of production. It's wholly dependent on ongoing relations that are shifting. And again, so this doesn't contradict anything about Buddhism. It's just like pretty important to apply it. And it's just a whole other set of stuff to understand. So like, to like summarize, like, Buddhism is like, it's one of the only things that I actually think like everyone should just like everyone should do 100%. Like I would say that more about Buddhism than I would about like dialectical materialism, possibly, because like, you know, we don't all need to fucking work out all the fucking theory. Like the point of doing the theory is changing society effectively, scientifically, such that we arrive at a set of conditions wherein some people can just like not have to fucking think about any of that and live life. And I wouldn't necessarily say it about religion. Like I regard a certain sense of Christianity to be very much the truth. But I wouldn't feel any particular need to impose Christianity generally on someone who didn't like viscerally themselves already feel a sense of its truth. But Buddhism is like, nah, you should fucking go take Buddhism to everyone. Like anyone who's not Buddhist, like please do a Buddhism, because it's like literally the methodology of free your mind. So Buddhism is unique in that sense. But it then is unlike each of like those other kinds of things. I don't think it can function on its own at all, really. If you are merely a Buddhist, like if you are a Buddhist and you have no other sort of like paradigm of knowledge that it is like catalyzing, you're sort of doomed to a kind of esoteric character. You're not actually functioning as socially integrated, because if you are a Buddhist, it's so like permeating to the deepest remnants of your psychology that like you become like a Buddhist in all you do. But if you're not in all you do, some other sort of thing that is tying reality together and like motivating a good hard look at other aspects of reality than merely the work of revelation of your own perspective, like how it is the case that you are in your own self the cosmic process. There's nothing that's like motivating you to basically to actually pragmatically successfully be noble, to do the noble stuff, because to just do all the noble stuff like that was good enough in like ancient India because there was no like more modern kind of state, and there was no world market, there was no like universalized culture. But today we live in like the post-colonial, post-Cartesian era, where like man as man has been distilled as particular individual based on the rights framework out of the pre-modern, just natural, organically communal integration. Alienation has been imposed on human character. You know, you could argue that some fucking tribe out there, this isn't the case for something, but if you're hearing me right now, it's fucking true. So, and in this context, you need religion, basically, in the sense I described. I mean, not the loose sense I described, like, dialectical materialism just is a religion. It's just like scientific religion, which is a concept that would fuck with a lot of people. Like I don't regard at all religion as implicitly having to be like supernatural or superstitious or anything like that. It's obviously a notion that is primarily defined historically by pre-modern and pre-scientific examples. So there are associations as such. But I think the basic correct understanding of what religion is that it's just this all-encompassing manner of integrating your own self and the substance of reality in this total aesthetic. So you need religion today more than before. Because today, unlike pre-modern history, you are just inescapably interwoven within the entire world market. Like you are dependent in like the regeneration of your being upon like just integration economically with the entire set of social relations that is built up in this massive web of relations. I mean, you know, basically globalization occurred. But even just in a loose sense, in the sense in which colonization was like doing some globalization. But at this point, it's like just, it's everywhere and it's all encompassing. So I think in our world in particular, Buddhism is just really not enough. You have to be a Buddhist, some kind of religion. In this loose sense. Like you can be a Buddhist Leninist and that is very much good enough. But I'm like a Buddhist Christian Leninist. Buddhism like catalyzes the pragmatically effective action of the individual in deploying religion. And without that religion, what it merely does is just kind of just create like a perfect like hermit. like the Platonic hermit, flawless hermit. You will just live in peace with hearing the birds and eating berries. But the problem is that today you like can't really fucking be a hermit. Like I'm not saying like morally like you ought not to. I'm saying like good luck with that. So yeah, that's the primary point. That Buddhism is just not enough. Buddhism is just limited. But the thing is, when you really get it, like this is good. This is good that Buddhism is limited in this way, because Buddhism is like a tool to enhance the other element, which is essential. It's a very unique thing in that way. And like, whoa, some fucking spike or something. Like you can be a good you could be a good whatever without it. But what that would mean is that you would like somehow naturally or like kind of eclectically, like unscientifically, you would just achieved some measure of progress towards the enlightened mind. That is how you were good at it. If you're not even remotely toward enlightenment, I mean, what that means, because Buddhism is true, is that you are caught up in the illusion of the separateness of self, and you're caught up in the reliance upon permanence of things, and if all this is going on, then like you'll just be terrible at whatever it is you are. Guaranteed. So Buddhism is just like a different thing to other like modes of knowledge or belief or anything like that.